A Wyoming coroner has identified remains that were found in Grand National Teton Park to be those of 22-year-old Gabby Petito. She was reported missing on September 11th. Her family says they last spoke with her in August, and she was supposed to be on a trip with her fiance, who has since gone missing. Let's take a look at the latest coverage on Gabby Petito.
A medical examiner has confirmed the body discovered in a remote area of Wyoming is that of Gabby Petito. The 22-year-old vanished while on a cross-country trip with her fiancé. Authorities have ruled her death a homicide, but there is no word yet on how she died. Meanwhile, her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, is still missing. FBI agents and police officers are continuing their search of a 25,000-acre reserve in Florida, where it's believed he went hiking sometime last week. That was the last that anyone knew of his whereabouts. The conditions there are challenging, with waist-deep water making up much of the park. Investigators are also chasing down multiple tips and possible sightings of Laundrie, some from hundreds of miles away.
They don't know where he is. The idea is they're getting close. This was something that they had called off at one point, and then they called this search back on with the FBI leading.
Laundrie's family says he told them he was headed there for a hike, left home with a backpack. And TMZ has since obtained this photo from a man who says a person that fits Laundrie's description was seen on their trail camera early Monday morning. This is in Baker, Florida. Baker, Florida is about 500 miles away from Northport, where he was last seen. However, people quick to point out the similarities between the backpack in the surveillance photo and a picture of Brian's backpack that was found on social media.
No, but this is such a tragic story. I know that Petito's family was very hopeful that they were going to find her alive. And when the coroner confirmed that it was her remains that were found, you know, obviously now this is a homicide investigation and her fiance is a person of interest. Now, he's not missing in the sense like she was missing, because he has been seen. He returned home. People saw him go back home. But at this point, it's almost like he's avoiding police.
Yes. Yet again, whiteness is able to get away with murder and come home and have some interaction of some type with the police. The police knew that he was back home, but he was not taken into custody. And then he subsequently fled. How many times have we heard the story in this country? This young sister is now dead. And if not for, I believe, some independent media, YouTubers who captured the original footage of the van, they captured the first image. If not for them, this man probably would have gotten away with murder altogether. But now he's on the run because of the leniency that we always see this system give white men.
Yeah. Well, and on August 12th, there was also a run-in that the pair had with the police. The two had been arguing, and in the body camera footage from this incident on August 12th, you can see Gabby Petito crying. She's distraught. She's saying, you know, that the two had been arguing all day. You hear from Laundrie. He explains his side of things, but she was very distraught. And so even looking August 12th, just weeks before she went missing, them having this encounter. But to your point about we've heard this story before, not to minimize this horrific situation.
That's right.
At all. But right now, there are more than 500,000 people who are missing, and nearly 40% of those people who are missing are people of color. But people of color only make up 13% of our population. So if we're such a small fraction of the population, yet we make up 40% of missing people, and, you know, I can just about guarantee you've never heard of Erica Hunt. I can just about guarantee you never heard of Kaya Taylor or Nefertiti Trader, who went missing in 2014. Asha Degree, she went missing in 2000. North Carolina, you never heard of her either. What about Alexis Patterson? Or how about this baby doll right here, Ariana? In 2016, she went missing, and so did her mom. Her mom was found dead, buried in a park in California. Kaya Taylor here, I met with her family, and that was probably one of the most horrific stories I've ever done. Kaya, she was pregnant when she went missing in 2017. You know, all of these stories that we don't hear of, yet everybody in this country knows Gabby Petito now.
Yeah, because, you know, the one thing our media loves more than anything else is something, if it bleeds, it leads. You know, if there is a story that can be sensationalized for headlines and clicks, there's nothing that they won't do. And so, unfortunately, the reason we know this story so well is because the media understands that this country responds. It responds when there is a white woman in distress, as it should, because, you know, she's a human being as well. But where is the response for our black sisters that have disappeared and not nary word from the system?
Where's the empathy? Why is it so hard for us to see Ariana's humanity? Why is it so hard for us to go to YouTube, go to TikTok and cry out for each one of these women? When you look at Akaya, knowing that she was pregnant, what happened to her unborn child? You know, where is that same empathy and that same urgency? Why is it that FBI is not deploying their resources to have investigations done in the same way that they did for Gabby Petito? We've seen this over and over and over again. But as I now have a 13-year-old myself, and I look at some of these women who have gone missing, and I see my own children in them, I can't help but be terrified that if it were my child, would the country respond in the same way that it did for Gabby Petito?
And I'm also thinking of just the different populations that get entirely ignored in these conversations. You think of the indigenous populations and communities who are still the same. I mean, just groups of people who are gone missing, and nothing has been said on the national level. Just all throughout marginalized communities, we see that there are people who are endangered and snatched away, but there's so much emphasis that is placed on the narratives that are useful to this system. See, they don't mind talking about this case because it's going to generate so many clicks and so many eyes watching as this story unfolds, because what this country wants more than justice, what they want are clicks.
And it's sad that we've been reduced to that, but it is true. And, you know, the thing about social media, the thing about national media drawing attention to something is we see when there's this national spotlight, it's easier for investigators to get the information that they need. It just so happened that a couple who was in Wyoming heard about the story and did recall, right? Like you pointed out, they did recall that I think I saw this white truck, and they went back through footage that they had. And sure enough, they were able to turn that over to investigators and use that as evidence. If media would shine a light on some of these other cases in the same way that it has on Gabby Petito, and not think about the clicks, but think about the humanity, and think about finding someone's 7-year-old daughter who's been missing for 10 years, or think about finding a pregnant woman who just vanished, and her family didn't even find out that she was missing until she didn't show up to her own baby shower. If the media would utilize the power that it has, we might be able to solve some of these other cases as well.
But, you know, we're subject to that all-powerful news cycle, because if it's not stimulating enough, it won't possibly make it into the news cycle. But if it's captivating enough, like Bring Back Our Girls, remember the story of the girls stolen by Boko Haram, right? And everybody, it was a thing, Bring Back Our Girls, where those sisters haven't been recovered entirely. There's still some that are missing. But now that it's no longer titillating enough for the news cycle, well, it fades away. In so many cases, Georgia, we see that it has to be something extreme. But in this case, as Joy-Ann Reid pointed out on MSNBC, it was the missing white woman syndrome that got this enough attention to get justice, because this sister, regardless of what color she was, she deserved justice.
Absolutely. And my condolences to her family. I truly hope that Laundrie starts to cooperate with authorities and comes forward and takes accountability for whatever role that he's had in her homicide. He knows something, and to your point, Ben, more than 700 Indigenous people went missing near the same place where Gabby's body was found between 2011 and 2020. But nobody ever heard about those 700 Indigenous bodies that were found. One thing that I've been exploring and covering here in Minnesota is the mounds. The mounds are across America. They are historically where Indigenous people have buried their ancestors. And what I'm finding, Ben, is that developers will come through a lot of times these burial grounds, cemeteries, for lack of a better word. They are oftentimes on the highest point of the city, which tends to be a very great view of the city. And so it is attractive typically to developers to come in and develop homes or develop retail stores there. And so what I've learned is that the human remains of Indigenous ancestors have been excavated by developers. They've been removed, dug up, so that we can construct streets and homes and places to shop, places to eat over cemeteries. I believe we have a clip. I want you guys to take a listen to a woman who is leading an effort here in Minnesota to reclaim and restore the sacred burial grounds of her ancestors.
It's been hard for me too, because I grew up on the east side, and even as a Native person, I brought my children to play at the playground. At the time, I didn't know that there were burial mounds all over this entire bluff, and that literally everywhere up here underneath the ground are the remains of our ancestors. I didn't know that. Indian Mounds Regional Park here is a place where a lot of the Dakota communities up and down the river would bring the bodies of their relatives to be interred here. We would put somebody's remains up on a scaffold until there were only bones that remained, and then they would be interred into the mounds. The place that you would want to bury your relatives is on some place high where they can be close to the stars, so they can find their way home along the Milky Way, and also so that they can watch over you. This, being the highest point along this part of the Mississippi River, naturally was an ideal place. Obviously, the way that this landscape has changed has been through colonization and what was best for the captains of industry along the Mississippi River. For the newly arrived colonizers, they thought this was the best view of the city, so a lot of our burial sites were plowed over and the mounds were destroyed to make room for houses so that people who were wealthy enough could buy those houses and have the best view of the river. I want to pay my respect.
So, Ben, I mean, when you think about people's homes are over the sacred burial grounds of Indigenous ancestors, I mean, how much more disrespectful can you get?
You can't. And I think, see, this is part of the absurdity, right? There's no respect when we talk about greed. This is merely an inconvenience for these corporations to remove the remains of. So there's something that I hold and I cherish deeply, the land of my ancestors. Right? If, as much as I can trace it being a survivor of slavery, right, we have that limitation, but that land, that means something because my ancestors are buried in that town. Now, you mean to tell me what reaction would you expect if you come in and you try to, in their bones, you try to interrupt their, it's serious. But for corporations, it's merely a detour on their way to their quarterly profit margins.
And I mean, when you think about the indigenous community and all that they have had to endure since colonizers came here, I mean, just the very thought of interrupting someone who has been laid to rest. And, you know, when we came here telling them that they weren't civilized, yet here we are destroying cemeteries so that we can develop properties. You know, you look at in Colorado, you have a governor who went ahead and he revoked a bill that was passed in, I believe it was 1864, that said that people should kill Native Americans and they would be able to get away with it in order to take their property. This was a bill in 1864 that was passed in law. I do believe that we have some coverage on that as well. We can turn to that if we do. But it just continues to show how the fabric of this nation is so deeply engrossed in racism, and how much it I mean, how culturally incompetent we are. Take a look at this coverage coming out of Colorado.
And Governor Polis signs an executive order rescinding 2 former proclamations. They were put in place by Territorial Governor John Evans about 150 years ago, and they endangered the lives of Native Americans.
Governor Polis and Lieutenant Governor Diane Primavera held the ceremony to mark the signing of an executive order. It officially rescinded proclamations by Territorial Governor John Evans in the 1860s
that called for citizens to kill Native Americans and take their property. The order eventually led to the Sand Creek Massacre, an attack that left more than 200 Arapaho and Cheyenne Native American women and children dead.
Polis called it the righting of wrongs of the past. Colorado leaders were joined by members of the Southern Ute, Ute Mountain, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes and tribes across the country.
I just want to know why that was even enacted as a law in the first place.
Oh, yes. I mean, the fact that this was on the books for 157 years and it just got off the books, I think should be a clear testimony to the fact that systemic racism, all the way to the extent of murder and then pillaging and plundering the property of Native Americans, of indigenous populations, that really should show us very clearly what this country was built on and is sustained on to this day.
You know, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that all of us are on the land of indigenous people. We see what's happening with the Line 3 in northern Minnesota being protested. It's violating treaty rights, yet and still you have corporations who are given a green light by government officials and also protected by local law enforcement agencies, despite the fact that they're violating treaties that were passed, and still so much stolen land that continues to get developed. It is just
water protectors, the water protectors and the pipelines that are crossing through the you know, it is just, it's not only the disrespect for these populations, it's also the disrespect that it's coupled with disrespect for the earth. You know, it's all compounded into one big absurdity.
Yeah, and when you look at environmental issues that we're facing right now, and you listen to our indigenous brothers and sisters, they really have the answer. The things that they have implemented through their culture traditionally, they respect the earth, they respect the water, they pay tribute to it, they give gratitude to it. I mean, all of the things that we really should be implementing in order to preserve the resources that we need to survive, right? Yet and still, their culture has been dismissed as being barbaric or you know, anything like that. Yet and still, if we listen to them and become culturally competent to some of their practices, I think we would be much better off.
Absolutely, Georgia, and I mean you've alluded to it a couple of times in this morning. The nerve of these barbarians to refer to our native comrades and colleagues and friends as uncivilized when we are trying to literally survive the barbarity of colonizers to this day.
And now, Ben, I know that you have been following some stories this morning as well.
Yeah, so we're taking a look at President Biden's speech before the UN, particularly one sentence towards the end that got a round of applause and a standing ovation, speaking to the fact that we are no longer engaged in a 20-year war in Afghanistan. But it's the sentiment about it that I want us to take a look at and consider for a moment. Let's run the clip.
For the first time in 20 years, the United States not at war. We've turned the page. All the unmatched strength, energy, and commitment, will, and resources of our nation are now fully and squarely focused on what's ahead of us, not what was behind. I know this. As we look ahead, we will lead. We will lead on all the greatest challenges of our time, from COVID to climate, peace and security, human dignity and human rights, but we will not go it alone. We will lead together with our allies and partners and in cooperation with all those who believe as we do.
Now, we'll get to the full segment in the next half hour during the Benjamin Dixon Show. But, Georgia, it's the fact that, yeah, I do recognize, and I think Joe Biden should be applauded for pulling us out of Afghanistan. We know that it was problematic, and there are so many things that need to be answered for, but we all agree that the war needed to be ended, and so we salute him for that. That was a great decision. But let's be clear, the United States is still engaged across the globe, whether it be proxy wars, whether it be our still limited engagement with the war in Yemen by proxy of Saudi Arabia, and our continued relationship with that barbaric regime. I think we need to be clear that we are not at a state of peace. And while we can celebrate the end of the Afghanistan war, we have to be very sober about our engagements that this empire is still engaged in.
Well, and I think the fact that he's trying to portray it as though we rather are not engaged in war anymore. I really wonder, as the Biden administration, right, we're still at the front end of him being in office, but as we approach the end of his time in office, how will this be reflected upon? Will it be reflected upon as a victory? I think we're seeing him trying to take control of the narrative, trying to spin it and make it seem like it's better than what it really is. It's, you know, the typical thing that we see politicians do, the smoke and mirrors, right? But when you compare that to what Trump did, right? If you're not up there at that podium speaking facts, if you're not up there telling the truth, and you're able to just lie to the American people, I mean, really, you're no better than Trump.
Because if we extend that, and I think this is our responsibility is to call balls and strikes here. You know, when he's right, he's right. When he's wrong, he's wrong. And while there's nothing overall wrong with his speech, it was a fine speech, right? The particular details that matter to black folks in particular, right? Because there's still a war that's going on domestically. It's the war on the black community. We can't declare ourselves at a state of peace when the very weapons of our warfare here in the United States, in the streets of Ferguson and every small city, are literally the machines that we had overseas. And so while we still have empire outside of the United States of America, it is a direct line to the domestic terrorism that black people suffer at the hands of the police state internally.
Oh, absolutely. And having been out there and been on the ground covering some of those protests, having been a person who's been shot by the rubber bullets that they deploy on people who are out there exercising their First Amendment right, whether it's protesters or journalists, the tear gas, all of these different weapons that are being deployed on American soil definitely makes you wonder if we are either in a civil war or if we've just normalized so much the militarized approach to dealing with American people that we no longer see it as war on American soil. But I mean, right. Literally, that's what it is.
Exactly. Absolutely. And we have to reject, one of the things that we have to reject going forward is this idea that so long as we individually have peace, that we are at a state of peace. Our peace oftentimes has come at the expense of so many other people across the global south. And so we have to be sure as we listen to this language, we cannot allow ourselves to be culpable with the oppression of any people across this globe. And I think as Black people, we have to draw the line and say, yes, we applaud everything that you're doing right. But let's be very clear and very sober. The United States is still engaged in too many wars, either they be proxy, cold wars, silent wars, whatever wars. The United States imperialistic hand can be felt in every corner of this globe.
And before we're out of time, Ben, I do want to point out the fact that it was announced yesterday that COVID has officially surpassed the amount of deaths, making it the most deadliest pandemic in the U.S. ever. Prior to COVID, the 1918 flu was the deadliest. And so now with more than 675,000 people dead due to COVID-19, we have surpassed that number.
Yeah. And we have far greater technology, so much more information, everything that we needed to prevent that number from going over, I don't know, but 100,000. It was a novel coronavirus, and so we were not prepared for it. And so there were going to be people who died. But I think we could look at the totality of the fatality list and really understand that that's not a product of the lack of technology. That's a product of the ignorance of our moment and the incompetence of our leadership.
Absolutely poor leadership. You and I reflected on this in summer months before kids went back to school. And I felt like we definitely saw the train wreck coming. We called it out when Biden said that he was going to allow kids to go back to school. We knew as parents that it was a poor decision, that kids should have been able to continue doing distance learning. And here we are seeing more and more children not only getting sick, but dying as well.
Yeah, that's the thing, Georgia. I really, you and I did call it at the beginning of the middle of the summer as we were getting ready to go back to school. There was no reason anybody's children should have gone back to school, period. Because we see the results. We've seen so many teachers who have died. We've seen so many